Let's get to the book of the week from last week that I'll talk about today. It is The Neuroscience of You, How Every Brain is Different and How to Understand Yours by Chantel Pratt, The Neuroscience of You. And if you've listened to the show, you know I've covered many neuroscience books. I'm very fascinated by them, find them very interesting, and often you see a lot of similar themes come up, which would make sense. I was actually talking to a friend, and she joked how I'm sure Phineas Gage will be in this book, because almost always is. There's a case of Phineas Gage where a metal rod went through his head, essentially went through his eye socket and flew out the other side. He survived, but his personality changed a lot. And so, yes, lo and behold, it wasn't an introduction of this book, but Chantel Pratt was sharing how it was fascinating to her that it seemed that even though he survived, he could do some things. He did change a bit. His personality did change, and people would say he's not the same Gage. He's not the same person he was before. And that was interesting to her, is that how, because he had this damage to his brain, it clearly changed who he was. So it would lead us to believe that our brains make us who we are in all aspects of it. Our brain makes our mind, and our brain makes our thoughts, behaviors, everything that we do. And one thing I'll definitely have to make a note of related to this book was that it was very, very funny. And what I thought was interesting, if you read this book, and I hope you will, the book is about the neuroscience of you, how we are all unique in the cliche way. Every brain is a snowflake. It's different from every other brain in the world. Even your own brain is different in each moment than it was in every other brain because of plasticity and because of how every instance and every encounter, every moment that we have information and interactions, it affects our brains. And so what I thought was interesting is if you read this book, you definitely get a sense that Chantel Pratt writes it in her own way that's similar to other books in some ways related to people who are in academia, but definitely has her own flair, her own sense of humor. A lot of times she uses the footnotes to make certain jokes that so I'd recommend you look at the footnotes. If you read the book, they're right there on the page, but also the jokes are throughout the book. So you feel this sense of humor. She talks about her own quirkiness, and you feel that in the book. And so sometimes I did find myself laughing out loud while reading it. And the book gets into how we try to understand the human brain. And what's remarkable is how much we know and how little we know at the same time, in the sense that, especially in the last few decades, with the advancements in imaging techniques that have come about, we've learned a lot more about the brain, but we still are really scratching the surface in understanding how it works, what causes what would be helpful, all sorts of things. It really is incredible how complex this organ is that we are have in our heads. That's dealing with so much of what we're doing. And so she gets into some of what we do understand so far about certain things related to the brain. And so this idea that every brain is unique, that theme runs throughout the book, because we see that often when people, if you look at certain neuroscience papers, books, they'll present, this is what the brain looks like angry, or this is what the brain looks like when it's experiencing sadness, or when it's doing this thing or that thing. But really what you're usually looking at is lots of statistics and things that are done to make these images, but also it's the average of many people. So you have, for example, the average of many people who were experiencing anger and what their brains looked like. So actually, it might not even be that any one particular person's brain looked that way in the scanner, but that when you average them, it looks that way. And that reminds me of some work I've seen by Lisa Feldman Barrett talking about emotions, that at times we say this is anger, this is sadness, this is these different emotions, but really no two people are experiencing exactly the same. So when we average them out, it could seem like it's telling a story, but it's in some ways a misleading story to say that this is what the brain looks like when it's experiencing different things. But so the chapters of the book go through a variety of things. First, looking at things like lateralization, or a chapter called lopsided. And so she gets into some of the things we've heard of like left brain versus right brain that people say, and specialization and lateralization is interesting. She shares how if we try to understand why that might be, that sometimes we want certain parts of the brain to be better at certain things, like let's say one hemisphere versus the other. And so again, it's not that one is better or worse necessarily, or we always want it to be a certain way. But she shares the analogy of, for example, if you have a sports team, a basketball team, and if you have a balanced team, the good part is that if one player gets injured, the team can function fairly well. Whereas if you have a team that's less balanced, and so you have one superstar or two superstars who are really good and much better than other players, that can be good in its own ways because of what they might be able to do, but then you're more susceptible that if there is an injury, you could be in trouble, because if you lose one of those star players, your performance will drop considerably as a team. So the brain could be seen the same way, that at times it could be good to specialize in certain things because those parts of the brain might become better or very good at certain things that can make the functioning better, but of course then you are more susceptible to injuries and things of that sort. So it's a kind of a evolutionary explanation or plausible explanation to why the brain might be that way. Also talks about different neurotransmitters in a chapter called Mixology, things like serotonin and also dopamine, and how important that is in understanding how we learn and how we learn things. And so it's fascinating that in every section we see that it's not that all brains do this. She shares the different things we observe, that some brains process things in this way, some brains experience things in this way, and some will experience them in other ways. And then again, it's not just differences between people, even within yourself. You are always changing. Your brain today is not the same brain you had 5 years ago. The brain is plastic, has neuroplasticity, meaning that it's always going to be in a state of flux. That doesn't mean that when I say it changes even moment to moment, that it's in this huge way shifting into something completely different, but that on a microscopic level, there are these constant changes that are happening to our brain based on what you experience. So even when we look at nature versus nurture, which she brings up in various sections of the book, to my mind, pun intended, this always means that there is some nurture that's going to be involved with practically anything, because our brain is impacted by what we experience. So it's hard to think that anything will be purely nature when we look at the brain because of that. So, there's the part on neurotransmitters, and so again, it's very easy to say, well, dopamine is the pleasure or the seeking chemical, but it's much more complicated than that, and she gets into some of the details of how it relates to things like learning and affecting what you do and choose not to do, which was quite interesting. Also, when we try to understand how the brain works, a big part of how we understand it is related to things being in sync, and that's the name of a whole chapter about how there's this principle of things that fire, the neurons that fire together wire together, meaning that when they're in synchronization or they're synchronous firing, they are more likely to be related to each other and connected. And sometimes even we can see that this might be related to how different brain parts communicate. And so this is also an important thing that I've seen more and more, that we often think of, well, okay, what part of the brain is functioning good or bad in, let's say, depression or creativity or whatever it might be. But we often see that it's less about looking at the brain as these completely separate, independent parts, but recognizing that a lot of what we experience and a lot of what we observe is related to the interconnectivity of parts of the brain. And so that's something that's important to keep in mind. And so what's also cool about the book is there are a lot of these self-assessments that you can take to see how your particular brain might be, for things like being more left or right dominant, and different things like, are you more likely to be reinforced by good things or going away from bad things? So being reinforced by the carrot or the stick. So are you more likely to go towards the good or to go away from the bad, and that reinforces what you do? So there are these easy to do short assessments that you can do to try to understand your unique brain, because I think there's a few themes in the book. One is that every brain is unique and trying to understand this difference, but then the title of the book, The Neuroscience of You, allows you to try to understand your own brain better as well. So I thought that was cool, and I took those tests as they were going throughout the book, which helps you understand yourself better and help me see some things about myself. There's also some things like looking at curiosity, which people can differ on how much they are curious. And so a lot of times I've talked about, and there's some books I've talked about that were related to curiosity, of it being a good thing. And I think in a lot of ways it can be a good thing, especially, let's say, to intellectually be curious and try to learn things and understand things. And I could also be saying that because I think I am that way, so I see it positively. But looking at the costs and benefits of that yes, it could be good to be curious and to explore and to learn more, but of course curiosity, there's that saying, curiosity killed the cat, that at times if you keep opening doors or going down certain paths, you can, one, waste time, so it can be the opportunity cost there, but also you can find danger or do things that are hurtful or dangerous to you. So this again goes along that theme that it's not that there's one right way of being, one better way of being, that we all are different. And she encourages you to, rather than think, oh, I shouldn't be this way and how can I change it, more try to understand yourself, why you might be the way that you are, and first just understand it, and then also understand the benefits of it and how that can be helpful to you. So although I'm talking about plasticity and that we can change and things will and can change, first of all, there's generally limits within that. It doesn't mean that if you're completely introverted, you can become completely extroverted. But the other part is maybe you don't need to be. And if you are very introverted, you can understand and embrace that rather than think, oh no, I need to be this other way and I have to change. So I like that that's a theme throughout the book, as well as that we're all different, we're all unique, and try to understand yourself, but also try to accept yourself rather than think you have to change it to become something, that there's some ideal way, some ideal brain that we all should be striving towards. And so I really liked that theme in the book as well, that we really can try to understand ourselves better and accept ourselves rather than think we have to change ourselves. So I really enjoyed the book, and I think what I want to do in the next section of the show, next segment, is to talk about the last chapter and some related thoughts of my own related to how we connect to others, but also related to how we see reality and how it feels so real and like it's the only way we could see things, but how it can be helpful for us to have the humility to recognize that not everyone sees things the way that we do, and the reality we see that looks to us like it can't be any other way is just a interpretation or understanding of what's out there. So I'll talk about that after the break. Again, the book is The Neuroscience of You by Chantel Pratt. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I wanted to continue talking about the book The Neuroscience of You by Chantel Pratt, and the last chapter is titled Connect. And as you kind of tease it up throughout the book, that trying to understand, well, it's so hard to even understand our own brains and our own minds, how hard it is and must be to then try to understand the mind of someone else, especially when we recognize that our brains are each unique and have ways of doing things. What was interesting is when she shares some research that people have done looking at people who become friends. For example, I think one of the studies was in a graduate program and looking at people who were friends or who had mutual friends, and they found that on certain characteristics, the brains of people that were more similar were more likely to be friends, which is quite interesting. So maybe we intuitively already know that people tend to become friends with people that are more similar to them, but it's interesting to see it at the brain level, that there are some patterns we can see and recognize that certain people or people tend to be drawn towards people with a similar type of brain in certain ways, rather than to those who are different from them. But this experience we have, or as human beings we're interacting with one another, I think it's one of those things that, as she talks about, we can see how difficult it is, and then that's what makes it so amazing how well we do it in a way. So we make mistakes, but we also do it quite well, which I think is quite amazing, and how automatically we can do that. For most people, we can try to understand each other fairly well. Again, we can get it terribly wrong often, and we aren't going to be probably completely accurate ever, but we can do a good enough job that, of course, we interact and create relationships and collaborate and do all sorts of things. So it is pretty cool. And she shares how there are a variety of brain or ways the brain can do this. One is things like mirror neurons. So there's a way that we really literally can feel what others are feeling. We see someone grab a cup, and so because it triggers these mirror neurons inside of our heads, we kind of feel what that's like, or going through other experiences as well. And then also sometimes we have to think a little bit more, and she shares this term that others have come up with, mindedness, when we're thinking about the minds of others or trying to understand others. And especially I think that term comes up looking at parents with their babies, parents with their children. But we can try to think our ways through it a bit too, to try to understand others. But again, we can do it really well, but also really miss the mark often as well. And so what can be very relevant to this book when it says the neuroscience of you and every brain is unique is that we recognize we are creating our version of reality. And of course, we hope it's enough of a shared reality that we can interact with others. It's not that everyone has these completely different in every way type of reality, but we do have to recognize that our brain, it creates a version of reality, but it doesn't mean it's the only truth or the only one out there. And she mentions the dress, which was also in a book a few weeks ago, I think, How Minds Change, about how there was that whole internet sensation, I believe it was 2015, several years ago, that there was this dress, a photograph, and some people saw the dress as white and gold, and some people saw it as black and blue. And what was fascinating about this situation, and I think what it illustrated so well, of course, it became, this funny thing, it went viral, and people, they're into camps, and you'd see people write things like, I can't believe anyone sees it as white and gold. It's obviously black and blue. What are you, crazy? What's wrong with you? And because it was something trivial like the dress, I think that also allowed for us to look at it and laugh at the situation, but it makes us realize this is the same thing we do with more important topics like political issues and different things, where we see the reality a certain way and we just can't even imagine someone seeing it differently. So for me, I do see the dress as white and gold, and it's very hard for me. I can kind of get it because I've read about it and seen things to try to understand even what might be going on, that because of your life experiences, it might affect how you see the lighting in that situation, and because of that we make certain discounts and things that we do to try to assess what the color actually is of the object we're looking at, and we do all of that automatically. So I can get that, but it's hard for me I can't see it black and blue. I see it white and gold, and I just can't actually see it. But what I can try to do is recognize that I see it as white and gold, but I can understand that others equally see it the way they do, as black and blue, as automatically as I do, as without thinking, without trying. That's just how it is, and they can't see it as white and gold. And this can be very important, to have this humility to recognize that what we see as reality is at some level our interpretation, our natural reaction to it. So we can't control how we see it, but we can control how we respond to it and how certain we are that this is the only way to see things. And so you see this with political debates, which even I could say it's interesting, they're even less of when we look at perception, you just see it as white and gold or black and blue, whereas there's some level of thinking that tends to go into political situations, although what we see is that it's much more of an emotional reaction. So in that way, I guess it is similar. We just have a reaction to it. But people are just so sure. Look at any issue that comes up and then see what people write on social media, and they're so certain that this is the only way to see it, and how could you see it any other way? So if we just try to use this dress analogy, so it's like abortion. Some people are like, it's black and blue, how can you see it any other way? And some people say it's white and gold, and how can you see it the other way? But of course here it's pro-life and pro-choice, but it's the same kind of a thing that is going on, that we can't imagine someone seeing it another way. They're idiotic, they're stupid, they are immoral, they're bad people, rather than recognizing, okay, maybe they have a different brain than me. They have a different brain to begin with, let's say, and then also different experiences shape them a certain way. You experience this. I've seen it so many times where you talk to someone, and now especially even more than before, when they bring up a political issue or a political candidate or figure, they talk about them in this very matter-of-fact way. So-and-so, oh yeah, she's so horrible, or she's so good. And you can feel, for many people, most people, the way they talk about them, it's like, well, of course you agree with me, because how could you see it any other way? And we recognize, or I try to recognize, that it's, of course, obvious to them to see it that way, because if they've been exposed to a certain type of information, if they keep seeing good or very, very bad things about this person and only seeing those things, well, they think, well, it's obvious. This is all the information on that topic, is that this person is good or bad. And so they think everyone else must see it that way. And this is unfortunately something we're seeing with the ways things like social media and the proliferation of a variety of ways to get information and media and different things has affected us, that we only see what we want to see, what confirms what we see, and as a result, we think that that's the only way anyone sees it. Now, related to that, when we look at conversations, something interesting that comes up in the book, and I was talking about curiosity, and so when we're looking at being curious and wanting to seek more information, if we're in a state of threat, we're obviously less likely to want to get new information. We want to stay comfortable, or that's whatever it is, or try something new, right? If you're afraid of that, what is outside is scary, you're going to stay inside if you're feeling unsafe. And so similarly, when we are having debates and discussions, and if you attack one another, and that's usually what we see, the type of discourse that happens, whether it's online or in person, is just very attacking and making the other person try to look bad and owning and dunking on them and making them feel stupid is the goal, and winning. Well, of course, people are not going to be as open to hearing what you have to say, even to having a conversation. So if we make it in an attacking mode, it's something just to be aware of. And I've seen this in not just political debates of current times, but even in relationships, families, or couples. If you turn it into a yelling match and it gets very, very heated, both sides are not going to even hear what the other person is saying, because we're not going to be open. We're not in that curious mindset to take things in. So if we're trying to tell them, this is why you have to do this, or this is why this is wrong, or this is bad, but you're saying it in a very attacking way, we can understand at a type of brain level why that's not going to work. It's not going to land, because the person is in a not safe, defensive kind of a mindset, not one that is open and receptive. So you're much better off waiting till you've both calmed down. First, also, it doesn't escalate further and doesn't get uglier, but also that if you actually want to hear each other, you have to be in a state of mind where you're open to hearing and receiving, rather than one where you're just protecting and attacking your opponent, in this case, who might even be your loved one. And another thing about this, recognizing how our reality obviously feels so real. It feels like it's the only thing out there, the only show in town. When it comes to things like, let's say race or sexuality, where it feels like when you're like, okay, this is just bad, or these people are good or bad, or whatever your beliefs and biases might be, they just seem so real. You're like, no, it's not that I'm racist or I'm sexist or I'm whatever prejudiced in this way. It just is the reality, because whatever we experience feels like it's very real, that it's not just an opinion or a thought or a side of things. It's going to look like the truth. Again, it's like the dress. It's white and gold or black and blue. It's not, well, maybe it's either, or maybe it's both, or I see it this way and others see it that way. But we'd be much better off if we recognize that even if something feels so automatic, it doesn't mean it's necessarily true, or some kind of capital T truth. For example, money. We can talk about how money is a social construct, and it is. It has value because we all give it value, and we all assume that everyone gives it value, and that way its value is socially constructed. And then, of course, there's markets and things which are also related to that. But to a lot of people say, okay, well, you say it's socially constructed, but when I just see money, or someone tells me I'm going to make money or lose money, I just viscerally feel something instantly. It's not like I think about it, or I need a social framework to tell me to feel something about it. In that moment, I automatically feel something. but the truth is still it is socially constructed. And it's also very important to keep in mind that when we say something is socially constructed, it doesn't mean it has no value or effect in the world. It absolutely does. Money is literally saving and ending lives and changing lives all the time because of the system that we have. And similarly, when we say that race is socially constructed, it doesn't mean that it's not impacting people. It definitely is. It's having a real effect. And people see it as real and discriminate in real ways based on this socially constructed thing. So the effects of it are very real, but it doesn't mean that it has some absolute truth basis to it that we can say has value. And this is why, again, it's so hard, because it feels so intense and real for people that this is something. Same thing with sexuality, that for some people it feels so intense that this is wrong to be this way, that this is the only right way to be. And what I think is very interesting with a point like this is looking at how views on things like same-sex marriage have changed in the United States in the past few decades alone. We see huge shifts, and nothing has changed in the absolute about what it means for there to be same-sex marriage. That act hasn't changed, but people's opinions clearly have, and their reality, or what feels like their reality, has changed. So they might not even realize it, and oftentimes we do see this change blindness type of a thing with our own views, that you might think, oh no, I always felt this way about same-sex marriage. But very likely because of the environment, because of the messages you've heard, certain things you've experienced, it has changed, but you might not be aware of that moment to moment, because in any moment your reality is the only reality you can know. So it seems like, well, no, this is it. I always saw it this way. I always saw the dress white and gold. It can't be any other way. And so I really appreciated this part of the book when we understand that every brain is different and unique. And of course, even as I say that, every brain is very, very similar too. And this is something I've always experienced when I, as a therapist, meet individuals, that I really do feel like every human being is unique. And I think it's so fascinating to understand them more fully in that uniqueness, while at the same time recognizing there's a common humanity that makes all people connected in some way and similar in some way. So our brains are the same way. When we say they're each unique, we're really talking about a lot of the details, but in a lot of ways they're very, very similar. But nonetheless, those unique aspects of our brains can create these unique realities that are important for us to keep in mind when we interact with others, that although we might see something a certain way, it's not some absolute truth, and for them, their truth or reality might be different. What can be good is to have the humility of our own reality and try to understand their reality better, so we can actually connect and communicate rather than just fight and prove who's right, when really neither of us has the one answer. All right, let's go to another commercial break. We'll be right back.